Okay. Hi, everybody. Phil Jenkins here, philosophy guy, and this is my friend Jason. And we are talking about stuff in preparation for, or not preparation, but in our semi-weekly session where if we get to it, we'll talk about Plato's Republic. So if we get to that, fine. If we don't, that's fine. We're just going to talk about things of interest to both of us. And if you're interested, fine. If you're not, then go ahead and click away and go find another video. So anyway, okay, so Jason, you and I were just talking about a couple of books that we've both been interested in. We don't have to recap the whole thing, but you were talking to me about something called Noticing, which is a book that you're enjoying reading, and I would like to look it up too. And then I share with you that I've been listening to on Audible, which I sometimes have an easier chance of making time for than sitting and reading, because I have a lot of other things to do, as we all do. A book called Atomic Habits by this guy, James Clear, and I've been enjoying that. So you were just going through how you're not supposed to like take a multi-part task and do it all at once. You're supposed to break it down or something like that, which is very consistent, by the way, with what I'm learning in this book, Atomic Habits, too. So why don't you go ahead with that and tell me about that?
Sure. For me, what I found to be most effective when I'm taking notes is and what I mean by effective, Professor, is as far as being able to comprehend the material and then being able to memorize it and apply it in the future.
Can you speak up just a little bit louder? Okay.
Sure. So the first part of my note-taking involves simply taking down the information similar to the way that a detective or a scientist would, strictly objectable, as objective as possible.
But are you talking about like when you're reading a book or just when you're doing anything?
Both. It could be an observation as I'm standing out on a street corner, to reading something in a book or watching a video or a movie. I try to apply it universally so that so that I have a very clear understanding of what I'm experiencing, and then from that point, I will, I will either I'll break it down into various parts and see how each part is distinguished. That's another part, and then categorize it and put it into a logical form that me. And then the last piece is I will write a essay. Relating to it in my own words, with my own, thesis or my own understanding of it. That offers me the opportunity to most effectively absorb the information and to be able to apply it. So I like what you were saying earlier about how you want to start writing papers.
Yeah, because I have a hard time. I mean, I love gathering the information. I mean, I need to write as part of my job as an academic philosopher. And it's hard for me to really get organized with the execution phase after I've taken a lot of notes and after I've done a lot of reading. I just love the researching part so much that the actual writing of it it's easy for me to be distracted by other things, just things I want to watch on TV or, reading something different. I get a little bored with the thing and I'll just sort of wander off. It's hard for me to sort of stay on task with that. Now I'm trying to write eventually for journals, but I can't write a paper for a journal because that's too big of a task. I have to break it down, like you were saying. So Yeah. How do you get yourself to actually write the essay? Like, what do you tell yourself you're doing it for?
For me, it's being able to bring all the pieces together. My previous understanding of what the material is in relation to some of the newly developed facts that I might come across in the book, or the observation that I'm, um, cataloging, and then I will I will make it my own. That part is the important part for me. Being able to cultivate something that has my genetic imprint on it.
How
So
do you,
that,
can you give an example of what you mean?
sure, sure. So I was studying nonverbal language recently, and there's a lot of information out there on that topic. And again, because of the line of work that I'm in, I do a lot of behavioral specialist theory work, cognitive behavioral theory, and with some of the new um, emerging information, I was able to, you know, um, I was able to develop a more profound, a more intimate understanding of uh, how proxemics are used with people who have autism, or how you can engineer their environment with color and temperature and texture. So I was able to penetrate more deeply into that material, and not just base what I was doing off of assumptions. So and it's usually a 3 or 4 paragraph base. So it's the information for it, it's the information against it. It's usually like a synthetic paragraph, right, where I combine what
Yeah.
and then a summary, or something like that. Just something basic.
Are you doing that mostly for yourself, or do you like put it somewhere, or you do it for work or anything?
Currently, it's just for myself.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really great. So you're gonna end up with a record of your own analysis of these different practices, and how you apply these different theories, um, for whatever purpose you may use them for later, or just for your own knowledge base.
What you said is critical, Professor. There is, and I did neglect to mention that there is a portion of this process for me where I will experiment with. I'll test the theory. I'll go out and I'll test it
Oh,
before I write the paper. I mean, I
okay.
don't. Yeah, I don't think it would be prudent to sit and write about these experiences, and to make claim without having validated it.
Yeah. Well, okay. All right. Well, let's. I'm going to pause just for a second. Okay. Okay. So just pause there for a second to take care of a little business, but we're going to now shift gears to Plato's Republic. So I'll share the screen here. And do you remember where we were, Jason? I don't know. God, I should write these things down.
In a few weeks, so I didn't. My notes are not.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Okay. So,
What was that? In contrast, Socrates, justice. How about somewhere where where it seems like a good logical jumping in point?
yeah. Um, yeah, I think so. We were talking. So they're talking about what is. They're talking about the question of justice. What is justice? What is a just person? And it kind of overlaps with the question, what is a moral person? So this isn't like just criminal justice. It's really what is a just person. And so the interlocutor here, who is Polemarchus, is being questioned by Socrates about what he means by his answer. Okay, so I guess the last thing that was said, Polemarchus, okay, so Socrates asks, according to you, what is justice? Say, what is justice? And so Polemarchus says that the repayment of a debt is just, and he's taking this away from something that the poet Simonides said. So the repaying of debts. Socrates says, well, that's not really clear to me what you mean. So I'm starting back here. When I sort of get on a roll, maybe we can kind of move along faster. But
Sure.
Simonides certainly doesn't mean that I ought to return a deposit of arms or anything else to one who asks for it when he is not in his right senses. So this is the idea of if you borrow an axe from your friend, and then when it's time to return it, your friend actually turns into a kind of a crazy person, kind of somebody who seems very hell-bent on doing harm to people, even though you owe the person the axe back, maybe you wouldn't give it back to them. Maybe it's not just to return that, to pay that debt, to return the axe to him. So when a person asks me is not his right, so when the person who asks me is not in his right mind, I am by no means to make the return. Okay, so Polemarchus says, well, certainly not. He thinks so. Polemarchus says he thinks that a friend ought always to do good to a friend and never evil. Okay, so this is kind of another layer of the response. So it's different, it's similar, but it's a different kind of response. So what justice is doing good for a friend. And then Socrates says, and our enemies to receive what we owe to them, which would be evil. And Socrates checks with them and says that Simonides must have been speaking darkly on the nature of justice, for he really meant to say that justice is the giving to each man what is proper to him, and this he termed a debt. And then Polemarchus says yes. And so then Socrates goes through some examples of where giving something that is proper to him, kind of testing this out in the world to see if it would be just to do these things. So if we asked Simonides, what due or proper thing is given by medicine? And to whom, what answer would he make? And Polemarchus says, well, surely medicine gives drugs and meat and drink to human bodies. Maybe they did medicine a little bit differently before. I've never gotten meat from my doctor, but healthy stuff. The doctor does healthy things for people or gets them to live more healthily. And what due or proper thing is given by cookery, seasoning the food. So somehow it's just for cookery to season food. That's what the proper, appropriate function of it is.
So that's important with the definition of justice. What you just said, what is it? The proper function? Is that what you said?
Yeah, like talking about justice, like defining justice in terms of a kind of a function.
Okay.
Like like if you have a just entity or a just person or a just, I mean, he kind of switches between different kinds of entities here. And then it seems kind of weird that we're talking about at first what justice is, and of course we think that means human beings. We think that would only apply to human beings, but then he changes to talking about what would be just for cookery to do, and that starts to seem kind of weird. But so it seems like he's looking at justice in a functional way, so that justice is doing something in a certain kind of circumstance where the appropriate thing to do, the functional thing to do, is that thing. And we're to give enemies what we owe to them. I know I'm skipping a little, as we went over some of this last time. So they are to receive what we owe them, and an enemy, as I take it, it owes to an enemy that which is proper and due, that is evil. Okay. Okay, we're down here. And or if you're on a voyage, I mean, the perils of sea, the pilot is the one that gives you the function of the pilot. A just pilot would go to war and make alliances. So one doesn't need a physician when one is healthy. Only when, if the just action of a physician is to give things to make us not sick, then we have no use for a physician when we are healthy. And that doesn't sound right to Polemarchus. And if we're not on a voyage, we have no need of a pilot. And so Socrates is kind of confused, or acts confused anyway, that he asks the question of Polemarchus, so you think that justice may be of use in peace as well as in war? Because Polemarchus doesn't want to say that justice is only useful in good times, that it's also useful in bad times.
Gotcha.
So he says yes, and Socrates says, like husbandry or farming for the acquisition of corn, yes. Shoemaking for the acquisition of shoes. And what similar use or power, Socrates says, of acquisition has justice in times of peace? And Polemarchus says in contracts, justice is of use. And by contracts, Socrates says, you mean partnerships? And he says exactly. Is the just man or the skillful player a more useful or better partner at a game of draughts? So which one's better at this game, a skillful player or the just man? So the skillful player, says Polemarchus. And in the laying of bricks, is the just man a more useful partner than the builder? Well, no, the builder is more useful. Then in what sort of partnership is the just man a better partner than the harp player in playing the harp, for instance? And that's when it comes down to money, a money partnership. But Socrates says, surely not in the use of money, for you do not want a just man to be your counselor. You do not want a just man to be your counselor for the purchase or sale of a horse. A man who is knowing about horses would be better than a just man. Polemarchus says, well, sure. And when you want to buy a ship, you'd rather have a shipwright than a just person. Sure, true. And what is that joint use of silver and gold, silver or gold, in which the just man is to be preferred? And Polemarchus says, when you want a deposit to be kept safely. So skipping over all these things, Socrates says, so of all the other things, like when you want to keep something safe, justice is useful. But when you want to use them, the person who's good at the art is more useful than the just man. So it turns out the way Polemachus is, his definition seems to entail or imply that justice is only useful when the objects in question are useless, and useless when they are useful. And Polemarchus kind of bites the bullet and says, okay, that's I guess that's true. Then justice turns out is not good for much under this definition, that is. But let us consider this further point. Is not he who can best strike a blow in a boxing match or in any kind of fighting best able to ward off a blow? Yes, and he who is most skillful in preventing or escaping from disease is best able to create one. And the best guard of a camp is the best to steal a march upon the enemy, certainly. And he who is a good keeper of anything is also a thief. I mean, this seems weird. I guess the idea, if you think of a doctor as somebody who knows all of the ways that a person, or maybe not all of the ways, but knows a lot of ways, is the knower of the ways to keep people healthy, then what this line of reasoning seems to lead to is that the person who's able to do the most for somebody can also do the worst to somebody. So a painter, a doctor can also make people sick easier, since they know all those the tricks of making people healthy, so they can turn around and they can hurt people, make people sick. It's kind of an odd thing, but it's he's trying to examine, he's trying to follow this argument out as far as he can of this definition that Polemarchus has of justice, because of course it's going to turn out to be inadequate, as are several attempts at defining what justice is, until Socrates gives us the proper response to the question, what is justice, later on in the Republic.
Now, Steve, that's a valuable prerequisite for me before I touch this material, because a lot of this would have just flew right by me. I would not have been able to ascertain what he was driving at. But see, that's powerful. Sometimes we need that. We need that leg up, to help us get over it. And then we're like, okay, now it's a little bit easier. Thank you.
That's good. That's good. I'm glad you said that. So then if the just man is good at keeping money, he's also good at stealing it. Polemarchus says, well, that's implied in the argument. Then after all, Socrates says, the just man has turned out to be a thief. And this is a lesson which I suspect you must have learned out of Homer, for he, speaking of Autolycus, the maternal grandfather of Odysseus, he affirms that what was excellent above all men in theft and perjury. And so you and Homer and Simonides are agreed that justice is an art of theft, to be practiced, however, for the good of friends and for the harm of enemies. That was what you were saying. So obviously this is not what Polemarchus wants to say. No, certainly not that, though I do not know what I did say, but I still stand by the latter words. Well, here's another question, Socrates says. By friends and enemies, do we mean those who are really or only in seeming? So really friends, or just people who appear to be friends? Surely, he said, a man may be expected to love those whom he thinks good and to hate those whom he thinks evil. Yes, says Socrates, but do not persons often err about good and evil? Many who are not good seem to be so, and conversely. That is true, says Polemarchus. Then to them the good will be enemies and the evil will be their friends. True? And in that case they will be right in doing good to the evil and evil to the good, clearly, but the good are just and would not do an injustice. True. Then according to your argument, it is just to injure those who do no wrong. It's looking at these implications of what is being said that may on the surface sound plausible. And so often we make decisions about arguments just based on the claim that's being made without looking at the reasons for the claim and without looking at what's implied if the claim is true. So that doctrine is immoral, says Polemarchus. Of course he doesn't mean that. Then I suppose that we ought to do good to the just and harm the unjust. Polemarchus says, I like that better. So he's not quite smart enough to see that he's the one that presented this definition, and he's kind of just going along and saying, that doesn't sound right. That sounds better. Let's do that. But when he says it sounds better, it's going to turn out he's affirming something that is counter to what he originally said. But see the consequence, Socrates says. Many a man who is ignorant of human nature has friends who are bad friends, and in that case he ought to do harm to them. And he has good enemies whom he ought to benefit. But if so, we shall be saying the very opposite of which we affirm by the meaning of Simonides. Very true, says Polemarchus, and I think that we had better correct an error into which we seem to have fallen in the use of the word friend and enemy. What error, Polemarchus? We assume that he is a friend who seems to be or who is thought good. And how is the error to be corrected? We should rather say that he is a friend to who is as well as seems good. Right? Does this make sense? It's a difference between, it's really turning on this difference between, are my friends people who seem to be my friends or people who really are my friends?
Right.
And this is always a very important theme in Plato.
Okay.
This when he has the character of Socrates talking about kind of honing in on what's real is what's permanent, or what's real is but oftentimes behind the appearances. So there's the appearances of things and there's reality of things. And we so often get confused and distracted by the appearances of things that we fail to see the reality of things.
Gotcha. That's good stuff.
Good. You would argue that the good are our friends and the bad are our enemies. Yes. And instead of saying simply as we did at first, that it is just to do good to our friends and harm our enemies, we should further say it is just to do good to our friends when they are good and harm to our enemies when they are evil. Polemarchus says, yes, that appears to be the truth. And Socrates says, well, but ought the just to injure anyone at all? Like if someone's just, don't we kind of tend to think of them as somebody who would not hurt anyone? I mean, would somebody be just if they were hurting people, even if the people were bad? And one gets the idea that this is one of Socrates' kind of key points, that he keeps pressing this. Well, if we go by what you say, here is the sort of ridiculous outcome. And now where we're at is, we're talking about appearance of friendship versus the reality of friendship, the appearance of being good versus the reality of being good. And it leads him to suppose that, to ask the question, should just people be evil to anyone? Undoubtedly he ought, and then Polemarchus says, undoubtedly he ought to injure those who are both wicked and his enemies. When horses are injured, are they improved or deteriorated? Now this is Socrates. The latter, so they're deteriorated when they're injured. Deteriorated, that is to say, in the good qualities of horses, not of dogs. This is Socrates. Well, yes, of course, it's of horses. Socrates. And dogs are deteriorated in the good qualities of dogs and not of horses, of course. And will not men who are injured be deteriorated in that which is the proper virtue of man? Certainly. And that human virtue is justice, to be sure. Then men who are injured are of the men who are injured are of necessity made unjust. Because if somebody's injured, they're injured in the way of human virtue. If somebody's really injured, we're not just talking about injuring somebody like kicking them in the leg or something like that. If you're really going to injure somebody, Socrates is going to the heart of what real injury would be. And a real injury would be injuring somebody's character, or you might even say to their soul, to make them less good people. I mean, that's when you're really injuring somebody, when you corrupt them in some way. It's much more than if you just physically hurt them. Say you physically hurt somebody, and that's bad, but the person heals and then they're fine. But if you corrupt somebody by getting them to become less of a good person, then they spread that badness around in the rest of their lives.
Can we, if you're not too opposed to it, I'm fascinated with that piece right there.
Uh-huh.
I'd like to stay with this till our next meeting.
Yeah, sure.
And can you say that for me again, Professor? The way you said, like, injustice is corrupting someone. It's corrupting someone, which is more what than physically. How would you put that?
So Socrates appears to believe that harming someone is unjust, particularly when it's harming somebody's character. And to harm somebody's character is to corrupt them, to make them into themselves a less just person.
Okay, because to me, there's something substantial. There's something very important about that, Professor, about that part of it. It seems to be like the heart of what Socrates. There's something there, and I want to look further into that.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit of a spoiler is that
Right.
part of what justice is going to turn out to be in public is a kind of a unity. There's more to it than this, but kind of a unity of a person's soul.
Okay.
So that, and I don't know if this part is really stated anywhere, but one gets the sense that a just person is somebody who makes other people better. Like who, and that's like a philosopher in the allegory of the cave. The philosopher goes up. I know we read the allegory of the cave
Right.
a few weeks ago, and I'm not going to. It's a very famous part of. I'm going to assume if anybody's watching this that they can at least go look up in Wikipedia with it, so we don't go through it right now. But in the allegory of the cave, the prisoner who's eventually going to become a philosopher gets free from the chains, and then goes up and out of the cave to see the reality of the world, to see the beauty of the sun, to see all of the real things in the world, where before that person had been watching shadows of the wall that were created by other people behind them in front of the fire. So the philosopher, if it was just about the philosopher feeling better or gaining knowledge, gaining wisdom, then they would have just stayed there. I mean, and the philosopher's tempted to want to stay there, but what makes him a philosopher is that the person goes back down and tries to teach the other people. And in fact, the other people don't want to hear it. The other prisoners don't want to hear what reality is. They don't want to hear that what they're looking at is not reality. So they start beating them up and actually even killing them. And they end up killing this person, the philosopher. So the philosopher is sort of somebody who ends up dying for the sake of trying to improve humankind. Now, is this prescient for what is to come a few hundred years later in Christian doctrine and the the stories surrounding Christ and the martyrdom. It's possible. It's also possible that that story, which also has been, that kind of story has been in a lot of religious and philosophical contexts in the ancient world. So it was kind of floating around, that sort of idea.
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, but I think that it's a little less grandiose, a little less when you take the religion aspect of it. I think there's something about that might even seem true today as it was in Plato's time, that when you I don't know how best to say this. I mean, don't we want the people who are able to learn how things work and how lives can be lived better, just better? And there's a certain objectivity to better, not just subjective better. And the objectivity kind of comes out in how Socrates lays out what a just person is, what justice really is in a person, this sort of harmony of soul thing. But don't we want those people to inform the rest of us and make the rest of us better? I mean, shouldn't that be the mission, of the philosopher? I mean, some people, is it wrong for people to learn about things and not share it with people and just use it themselves for their own, say, career and aggrandizement? I mean, I think that's probably fine. I don't think it's necessarily an obligation for everybody. I think the world could be better if everybody tried to be a philosopher in the sense of helping other people with where they've been. But it's certainly in the tradition of philosophy since the Republic, which was written in, I'm going to get this date wrong, but in the 400s, 300 BC. I just showed my ignorance in not carrying that date around with me. I should know these. As much as I've read this, I should know the date.
Well, I'll tell you something else too that came to mind when you talked about some of the functions of why somebody would want to go out and help others. It would accumulate a larger knowledge base. It would be something of more value, of greater value to humanity, to have this cultivated collective, knowledge. I think there's a lot of pieces to it.
Yeah, I think there's something in the idea of wisdom that implies a certain helpfulness to other people with what it is that you've been able to gather and learn on your own. Mm-hmm. It's something, and it's something that's not just knowledge. I shouldn't say it's just. It's not knowledge necessarily about like how bridges work or how to bake or something like that. We're not talking about just any kind of knowledge. We're talking about knowledge about how how humans relate to each other in some important way, and not psychologically, because psychology deals with, like, say, social psychology studies how people deal with each other. But generally speaking, psychology is a descriptive science, so it's not a prescriptive science. So psychology will tend to gather the data and aggregate it in such a way as to sort of get right how people are, how people operate. But philosophy is much more focused on using that information, but also in making difficult choices about value. What is more important? What are those value judgments? I mean, value judgments seems like for a long time have been a dirty word, well, don't make a value judgment. But we need to make value judgments. I mean, that's how we live our lives, according to our judgments about what's valuable in the world. And these are the kinds of things that people tend to, at least seems to me, seem to be lost about. So they might tend to just take what other people tell them as being important and follow that, which maybe that's kind of like the prisoners looking at the shadows on the wall, because it's it's straight from other people, just giving um, their own view of without any foundation, just telling what they think is important and just try to inculcate other people in that same view.
And I think I like what you're saying again, because I think it's an injustice to spread something that's invalidated. Because it will lead so many people to, it will deceive. It's a way of deceiving and misleading people. And so you're right. I think it's important for all of us to do what you're saying, not just take what we're given, but like Socrates did, like he was able to take many perspectives and to see if it seemed stable or unstable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So we'll pick it up there next time. And
yes.
Anybody's listening, thanks for listening, and good to see you, Jason, and I'll see you next time.
A good week.
Okay, take care.